Alrighty. Hi there. Thanks for tuning in, and big thank you to HalfStack for having me. I'm very excited to tell you my story. And yeah, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name's Ramon. I've been freelancing as a software builder for 10 years now. I do a lot of community work here in my hometown of Vienna in Austria. And yeah, I'm also a member of the Mozilla Tech Speakers Initiative, which is a program to help enable people to give talks about the open web. And it's a lot of fun. So one of the things that I love about freelancing, amongst others, is that it allows me to pick projects that puts me in lots of different contexts. I've been very lucky to be able to work in things like telemedicine and refugee relief. And one of the projects that I'm going to tell you about today is to do with gastronomy. So the name of this client is Takeaway, and they're a company that takes care of three things. One is a catering. Second is cafeteria lunch for office workers in industrial areas, and also running a restaurant. And my main focus goes into this middle part. So over the years, I've been helping them develop an app that allows office workers to log in either on a mobile device or in a computer and order their lunch for the coming week. It's then, processed and delivered and consumed normally in a canteen. And in these canteens, the company also provides their own little cash registers or point of sales. And these normally involve, depending on the company that the client takes care of, a chip card reader to identify the customer and a receipt printer to print out a receipt. And the images aren't great, but just imagine they're plugged in with cables. And so they've been running this with a proprietary piece of software that they purchased from a vendor. And after some time, they came up to me and said, Ramon, could you please develop a point of sale system for us from the ground up? Now, you might be wondering, if we already have this solution, why would we want a new one? It's a valid question. So the CEO, who happens to be a software developer himself, tells me that the reason comes from data processing. So at the end of every month, we need to extract the data from that cash register or point of sale. I'm going to call it point of sale from now on. And that's in a proprietary format, normally in MySQL or something, Microsoft MySQL, something like that, which then needs to be exported in a data format that works with the takeaway system itself, which is a Ruby on Rails app. So in order to save himself doing that for, I think they have about 30 companies under their wing. So they want to be able to make that as smooth as possible. They said, all right, let's just roll up our own. And so I like to give my projects fun names. So I called this one Project Casadilla. Casa being the German word for cash register or point of sale. So the way it works is customer comes in, they scan their chip card, they confirm their orders on the terminal of the point of sale, the receipts get printed, and they get their food. Good to go. I think I had a pretty good idea of what is expected of me, except just before getting started, the client came up to me and said, by the way, do you think you could have it done in a couple weeks? 3 weeks to be precise? Which had me a little bit, I mean, I'll give it a try. I mean, I'm up for it. Yes, I can. So we got started. First part was coming up with the hardware. A bit of a backstory. I am not a hardware expert by any means. I mean, I've dabbled a bit of hardware. Those that know me know that I've done a little bit of Raspberry Pi stuff in the past. So I thought, okay, we can start with a Raspberry Pi to be as cost effective as possible. So we have a touchscreen monitor, the Raspberry Pi, the receipt printer, and the chip card reader, both plugged in, of course. And as for the underlying hardware, we'd have software. We'd have some Linux. We'd have a browser running Chrome, which I thought could run on top of our Ruby on Rails app. And the way it would work on a daily basis is that the cash register employee would come in, log in, and start it up and start delivering the lunch to the office workers, essentially to be as seamless and unobtrusive as possible. So that's where we had the idea to use ViewJS in order to do this. And this would be our first time using ViewJS on this existing Ruby on Rails app. And for those of you familiar with Ruby on Rails, I didn't know this going in, it allows us to set up Vue.js on top of Webpacker, which is a Ruby framework that runs Webpack on your Ruby on Rails app. And what is incredible about that is that it's already built in such a way that we can get up and running. This is what it auto-generates, plugs into all of the existing Rails infrastructure for JavaScript, and I can hit the ground running. So having done that, I thought, okay, let's lay out what a Vue.js app will look like. This would be my first time working with Vue.js, so I was pretty excited. Now, we would have, of course, our app itself, the point of sale, and then three major components. The user lookup, where the customer would come in and scan their chip card and they would be identified. The menu on offer that the cash register employee would use to see what's on offer and can tap in the requests of the customer. And then the checkout area itself, which would hold what the user has ordered so far, the shopping cart, how much they would have to pay in total, the total, and a button to submit their order to the backend Rails app. Now, I'm going to, in this talk, show you how I developed those components and the bumps and bruises that came along the way and what I learned. Now, we're going to start with this user lookup. And I didn't mention this because it's one of my favorite parts. See, these chip card readers are pretty cool because they actually, to a computer, aren't some sophisticated piece of hardware, but their firmware tells the computer, hey, don't mind me, I'm just a USB keyboard, which is cool. See, each chip card has embedded into it via NFC or near field communications technology a identifier, a number that we use to identify a user. Now, what's cool is that this chip card reader, when it scans it, what it tells the computer is, hello, I have pressed 4962, for example, followed by pressing the enter or return key. This makes my life significantly easier because I can just use a text field or lookup key, a field in the web app for the point of sale to identify that user. And given that the app was developed, the base app was developed using Bootstrap, I was able to bring in a plugin for Bootstrap called Bootstrap Select, which is pretty cool because to a web app, it just looks like a select field, a drop-down field where you can pick one of several options. But all of the names I've kept private except for this sample name that I've put in. Now, what you see here is a text field where you can leave focused that a user can come in, scan their chip card, it goes beep, and then it would look up automatically the user, such as Abita Briggs, who has the chip card number 4962, and register them as making an order. And that was it. I was able to move quickly onto the menu itself. Now, just so you know, the way we've structured our database is that a user who works at a company has a number of articles available to that company. Articles being meal items like desserts, drinks, and so on. And these are divided up into categories: drinks, desserts, and so on. Now, this next slide is in German, but don't worry, I'll translate for you. So what we have here is what the menu would look like to the cash register employee. You'll see things like menu 1, meat dish, menu 2, vegetarian dish, budget menu, salad 1, meat, schnitzel, which is they're famous in Vienna. They're like a meat, a breaded pork or a turkey steak. Sorry. Soups, desserts, and so on. And you see at the bottom, there's two categories, main dishes and ice cream. That's what we needed for this one company. So you might be wondering, okay, you've showed us some of the layout, but where exactly are you pulling in this data from? Now, from backend perspective, I was able to set up, with Ruby on Rails, I can set up what's called an API mode that opens up a few API endpoints that I can then access the data from. No problem. But what about on the Vue.js side? And that's where I learned about something called Vuex. which is a framework provided by Vue open source developers that allows us to have a shared store across the ViewJS app itself. And what I found interesting about it is that it does so instead of having a general store itself where the data gets synchronized automatically. What kind of happens is you have mutations, which are procedural instructions that you send to a store and say, hey, this is how I wish to mutate the data on this store. Now, this is where some of the heavier code is going to come in. See, to declare a store itself, I can do so in Vuex in its own index file, where what I've done is I've broken it down into a series of different stores. You'll see here I have an article store, which I mentioned before is each of the food or drink items, an order item store, which makes up an order, user store, which I was looking in the user lookup to identify each user and bring them all into the ViewJS app. The order store to declare those orders, and then I can just declare these all. Hey, these all make up the general data store itself. I'll show you an example of one. This is the article store itself. Now, what I can do is tell the Rails app, hey, I want you to call the index action on the Rails app to get all of the articles and split them up by category. That allows me to then go over to my menu component itself, tell it, hey, I need to use these data, that is, the categories and the articles themselves, and make a series of rows using Bootstrap to populate these buttons that I can then press to trigger adding an order item based on that article. Don't worry too much about the code itself. I know I'm going pretty fast. Now, what happens next is I declare a couple of functions that I'm able to use in that Vue component. You might have noticed them already: add article, select category, and ID for category button. I'm just going to show you one of these just to show you that these are all for the same component. So when I click on a button, it triggers the add article function. And what that does is essentially tell the order item store, hey, I've got a new order item for you. It's made up of this article. It copies over the article data itself for database purposes, along with the price and the VAT and all of that. And that's the menu. Let's move on to the shopping cart itself. Just to remind you, this is what the app looks like. We've got the user lookup and the menu, which we've already gone over. And now we're going to look at the checkout area itself, which starts with the shopping cart. Now, the way it looks in the database is a user has several orders, and each order is made up of several order items. An order can, of course, include lots of order items, a menu, a drink, and a dessert. I'm going to show you an example of an order made up of several order items. I was in a big ice cream mode, so I ordered a Cornetto, a Magnum, and a Calippo. And this is how it looks like for the cash register employee. And you'll notice that next to it is a button that says Entfernen, which is German for remove. Learning lots of German today. And the way this looks in the code base is we have a table, which is populated from the order item store. And each of these has a row for each order item with 3 columns: the name, the gross amount, and the button to remove that order item. And then I can call the function, for example, remove order item, when pressed, that looks up that order item and updates the store to be made up of the same order items except the one that I removed. That's the shopping cart. Let's move on to the totals. And this is a row that appears below the shopping cart that was probably one of the most satisfyingly straightforward ones to make, because all I had to do was iterate over all of the order items, add up their prices, and just remove that amount, show that amount. And that's it. Next comes the kind of bigger part, which is sending the order off. See, below the totals row, we have a button called submit. In German, that would be erstellen, I think. Sorry. Now, when you press this button, what would happen is we'd call this function called submit order, which would dispatch an action on the order store with a brand new order made up of lots of order items to call the create action, mutation on the order item on the order store, and would then reset all of the order items to be blank so that we can make a new order itself. Now, that's that. Sends that off to the Rails app. Pretty easy peasy so far. Now comes the receipt printing, because yes, I mentioned a receipt printer. I don't know how much you know about receipt printers. This is what's called an Epson thermal printer. Now, the thing I didn't know about thermal printers is they actually don't use any ink. They're called thermal. They kind of burn the paper. It's wild. And these Epson printers use a protocol called ESC POS or SPOS. People pronounce it differently. They provide a 40-ish page PDF manual with a nice breakdown of how it works. You send hexadecimal data over to the printer itself. We decided to do it directly via the USB connection. More on that later. The nice part is I discovered that there's also lots of frameworks to help you do this. I found one for our Rails app, our Ruby app called SPOS, and it's pretty nice. It allows me to declare lots of different functions that I can run to format a nice looking receipt. Text, tables, formatting, alignment. You can even add images and QR codes. So I'm going to show you a tiny bit of Ruby code. Don't worry about it. See, on the Rails app, when I save a new order, what it does is it responds not just with the order data itself, but also with base64 encoded receipt data. Now, I'll just show you a tiny bit of what that looks in the order ESC builder. It allows me to use things like line formatting and sprintf to declare, for example, in this case, VAT amounts. A little bit of German there, showing how much VAT is in that order. And what I can do is, having sent off that data as said in base64, is I can receive that in the ViewJS app. I'm back here in the order store, and I can store that receipt data in the store itself in order to be used later. So when I send off my order, the response comes with a 200 OK, and here's some receipt data. I can then use that receipt data I can then send that receipt data as an HTTP request over to a server that communicates directly with the receipt printer, as said, via USB. So what you're seeing here is I perform, as said, this request to a local host, a locally running Ruby server, separate from the Rails app. I'll show you a bit of the code here, Ruby again. That, as you can see, what it does is opens up the USB file descriptor and just pipes that data in. And then the printer itself is smart enough to print it out. And I'm going to show you a sample of one. I've blurred out a little bit of the private information. So Lieferschein basically stands for delivery note. Ignore the prices. Those were test prices. A salad buffet does not cost €1,000. It was just to allow me to, test how big I could make the numbers without messing up the formatting too much. But here you can see I break down my order in terms of order items, their prices, and so on. And I can also provide a VAT breakdown, which is pretty cool. And that's it. I built the point of sale system, and I was pretty lucky to be able to be done in about 2 weeks, which gave me ample time to tell the client, hey, I'm done. Let's go set it up. And they were super happy about it. Let's say, all right, come on down tomorrow. It's a bit of a trip, but it'll be worth it. So there I showed up, ready to set up all the hardware. I wish it had looked this cool. Now, much like deploying web apps or other kinds of apps to production, you have to deal with a couple of things that didn't come up in the test environment. These were more hardware oriented, which I found interesting. Problem number one is, like, on the day we were going to set this up, or the day before, my client says, you know, I know we have this Raspberry Pi and the touchscreen and all that, and that works really well. I'm glad it does. But it would be a shame to waste the existing software. The existing hardware of the point of sale that we're running. If we just need a browser, why not use this? Thing I didn't mention, it runs on Windows, which is fine, except I have no idea how to run this receipt printing server on Windows. Unlike Linux or Mac OS, communicating via USB file descriptors in Windows is kind of a different story. From what I understand, I am by no means an expert, and I gave it an honest try. I spent a day in the Windows Win32 SDK development and documentation, and sadly I got nowhere. But then I thought, okay, counteroffer, client. Given that we're not using that Raspberry Pi anymore, how about we just turn that into a printer server itself? So it runs on the same network, and we just send it the receipt data, and then it prints to the server via USB as before. So, in case I didn't mention, Raspberry Pis run Linux, so that made my life a lot easier. And it worked out. Next problem. This one was a little trickier. Given that I had been working on this single screen Raspberry Pi device, when the time came to deploy it, the customers quickly realized, hey, I can't see what I'm ordering. What's going on? You can't really tell in this picture. You might be wondering what this part on the back of the point of sale is, and I was wondering that too. It's a second screen, which had the purpose of doubling as a screen where the customer could come in and see what they were ordering as the cash register employee was punching it in. So we had to come up with a solution. The quickest one I thought is, okay, well, I'll just use Windows functionality. Windows' built-in functionality to mirror the screens. And I thought, okay, that could work. Problem. See, different screens have different resolutions. The resolution on the front screen, as you can see, is 1080p, pretty standard resolution for an industrial screen, I'd say. The back one, however, is 800 by 600, which is pretty low. And what happens is, at least in Windows, when mirroring two screens, what Windows does is it defaults to the resolution of the smaller of the two, which means that on the bigger screen, I had a resolution of 800 by 600, which doesn't sound so bad, but unfortunately killed a lot of screen real estate for the cash register workers, and it meant that I had to give up on that idea because we couldn't really effectively make orders anymore. Now, my client suggested, all right, well, how about using some sort of video software to sort of stream the video of a portion of one of the screens, that is the shopping cart itself, onto the other screen. And long story short, it didn't work. Two reasons. One, I'm not saying that paying for software is bad. Absolutely not. Proprietary software, is not a bad thing. The problem was we couldn't do that in a time-effective fashion, getting through accounting and doing all the accounting parts that I'm not really involved in as a freelancer, meant that I needed to come up with a quicker solution. And the other problem was, and this was a little more egregious, is that it didn't work. It kind of started messing with the USB input of the chip card reader, and it started happening that when we would scan a chip card, some of the portions of the chip card number that identify a user were kind of getting gobbled up. We didn't really understand what was happening, but it meant that we were assigning orders to the wrong users, which is really bad. So we scratched that idea altogether. And then I thought, all right, maybe how about we stream the data instead of the video? The video of the screen across two browsers. Two browsers, you say? or two browser windows. Now, I was thinking of doing it using something, say, like the browser's built-in local storage functionality. But I did some Googling around, and I mean, there's an NPM package for everything. So I found this tool called Vuex Shared Mutations, which is amazing. If you remember what I was saying before, mutations are one-time actions that update the store. So what we're doing is not sharing the store itself, but rather the mutations that take place on a store of data. It also meant that given that this is a Vue app that is component-based, I could reuse some of those components in a new Vue app, which I called the customer basket. Namely, all of the things I needed to see, the shopping cart and the totals. This is what it looks like empty. An empty table and €0. Now, I'm just going to show you some examples of mutations. Here's set and then the names aren't great, and I apologize. But one is to set them to have a certain set of order items. The other one is to reset them to be empty. There's an action for adding an order item. And what I can then do in the general declaration of my Vuex store is say which mutations I want to share. Namely, add, reset, and set. Now, what's cool about this is that only these mutations will be shared across more than one browser browser window that accesses this store. What this means is I've got here in the cash register employee side the Cornetto, the Magnum, and the Calipo, but then on the other screen, if we turn around, lo and behold, we have Cornetto, Magnum, and Calipo without the remove buttons because we don't want the customers to remove them. We want the cash register employee to do that. So then what happened? I dealt with these problems. We let it run for a while, and then the feature requests came in. They usually come as things you kind of got to decide on whether you want to kind of bolt them onto the side or really, decide whether they're really necessary. So I wanted to share with you some of the things that came up. Pardon me. We've got things like having subsidies. What this means in this context is, see, a company will subsidize some of the office workers' lunch, at least here in Austria. I don't know how it is everywhere else. I don't work in an office. Some stability improvements, by which I mean, what happens if the browser windows kind of get out of sync. Fortunately, never happened. Or if power goes out, I need to set up a way in order to effectively set up those windows again. There's some scripting tool in Windows that allows me to do that. And also, of course, getting the receipt printer on the same device as the point of sale itself, eliminating the need for that extra printer server. When giving this talk earlier, someone also brought up to me the points, some questions about how to make this a more accessible piece of software / hardware. What I learned is that there is a law, at least here in the EU, that's going to pass pretty soon, about making these kind of terminals more accessible. Of course, there's a lot that has already been done in terms of screen reader and keyboard technology, but there's lots more to consider. I need to learn more. And boy, did I ever. I had a ton of fun doing this project. As I said, it wasn't my first one working with hardware, but that doesn't mean that it didn't come with some valuable lessons along the way. It does get less daunting over time. Hardware is a little more brittle when it comes to, let's say, failures than software, perhaps, but you can work past that and learn a ton more. This kind of seems like a hacky solution for a point of sale, but the point is that, yes, but it allows us to learn and let these lessons flourish into new technologies. Now, given that I'm not an expert, I also found myself reminding myself not to let myself get stuck for too long. If I reach out for help, there are people out there, there are communities out there of very kind and helpful people who helped me along the way. And it reminded me that I could leverage my existing web development skills to expand into hardware, which is something that doesn't come up very often for me. And it's a lot of fun, and it kind of empowers me to try new things and step a little bit outside of my comfort zone. So that's me. Thank you so much once again for hearing me out and joining me on my journey, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much for that awesome talk, Ramon. That was just great. And thank you so much for joining us for Q&A.
Thank you for having me.
So, first question to you. And this is one that I would love to know, actually. Why did you pick Vue for this project? Is it something you were most familiar with? Did you think it was the best match?
Yeah. Well, there's a two-sided answer to that. Well, so the main client, the CEO of this takeaway company, he's a software developer, and he kind of likes to kind of throw frameworks on me every now and then. So he'll have read a blog post or something and be like, we should try this Vue.js thing. And that's kind of how it happened. It just so happened that I was also pretty enthusiastic about it. This was, however, my first time using Vue.js. So it was also kind of an excuse to, try it out and get used to it. And it was a nice opportunity to get to know the community as well from Vue.js. So I, went to my local Vue.js meetup and met some of the folks there. And it was a lot of fun.
Nice.
Yeah, I must say that the Vue.js project seems to have a really, really friendly and welcoming community built up around it. It's certainly been my experience of going to Vue.js meetups, not knowing anything about it, to be completely honest.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the people I spoke to especially were very kind and helpful.
So this is obviously, we're in lockdown at the moment, and there's a lot of people working on side projects. Have you been working on anything yourself? Apart from freezing. You can do a really good freezing impression. So I think we should take a moment just to marvel in some of the lovely stuff on his bookcase.
Yes,
yeah.
I think Ramon lost us for a second, so we can just talk among ourselves till he returns.
Sorry about that. My Skype crashed.
This is why we record a lot of the sessions, so we can, it's not total fail if the session dies right as you're presenting,
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, anyway, it's all good.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
These things happen. So I was just saying that we're in lockdown at the moment, and there's a lot of people working on side projects and kind of passion things just to learn new skills and new libraries. Have you been working on anything while you've been in isolation?
Yeah, I'd say, when the lockdown started, by pure coincidence, my freelancing work just kind of piled up out of nowhere. So I've actually been pretty busy on regular work, but I've also taken the opportunity to do some side projects here and there, mostly dipping my toes into new technologies. I'm trying out building command line tools with Rust, just to get myself familiar with the environment and the community. I'm big on communities. Like when I see a friendly community, I'm kind of like, I'm going to try out that tool. So I was trying that a lot. I also, over the years, had piled up a couple of hardware kits from here and there, mostly from Raspberry Pi related things. So I started actually taking these and building them. I've got one here that I wanted to show you. This is the Pi-cade.
Nice.
So this is a little Raspberry Pi arcade toy running on Raspberry Pi, of course. And it's a lot of fun. It lets you run homebrew games from retro consoles. And I had to put it together myself. It was a ton of fun. My next one here is called a stringy, and it's kind of like a guitar synthesizer thing. Yeah, I don't know what to expect yet. I have no idea what it sounds like. So basically keeping myself busy with that sort of thing, as well as attending probably too many online events. I'm so thankful that the community is running so many of these. For better or for worse, it means that I've got just about every evening allotted to something or other. But it's great because I get to kind of travel the world and get to know these communities. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I've been running a couple of them myself. We've got our study group for learning all things coding, where we just get together every week and chat about whatever we're hacking on. And since we're in lockdown, we thought this week, hey, let's try it in Mozilla Hubs. Mozilla Hubs being a kind of virtual hangout space where people can chat and hang out and do really fun stuff. So it's just been a lot of fun. I've been having a really good time.
Is that something that our audience can get involved in?
You mean the study group or Mozilla Hubs? Absolutely.
Mozilla Hubs, yeah.
Oh yeah, Mozilla Hubs as well. Yeah, they're always looking to improve it and find ways to reach out and talk to folks about it. And they're the maintainers and people around it are so kind and helpful and so eager to help.
That's awesome. We've got a question in the chat. It says, the POS hardware that you used, what is it? And is it possible to buy it somewhere for people to do experiments from home?
Yeah. If you're referring to the 2-screen one that I was using, I believe so. I am so sorry, but I don't know the name off the top of my head because that was already provided before I started working with this client. And so I didn't really pay much attention beyond the fact that it runs on Windows and I had to get something running on it quickly. But I'll look it up and post a link. I'll post it on Twitter if people are curious on checking it out. If not, as said, I would really recommend trying out just a Raspberry Pi and a touch screen. Those are pretty affordable, and all you need is a browser. I hope that answers your question. Sorry.
So while you're on the subject of links, somebody in the chat's asked for some groups or meetups that you'd recommend. So maybe after we've wrapped up here, you can just dump some links into the chat group of some of the standout meetups that you've been to.
Oh yeah, sounds good. I'll happily do that.
Yeah. Awesome. So I see you've got loads of gadgets and gizmos on your shelf behind you. One that looks like a MIDI sequencer, but I don't think it is. Something's telling me it's not. And a funky looking keyboard as well. What are they all about?
Well, as I said earlier, I like to keep myself busy with funky little hardware projects just to teach myself a little bit about soldering and that sort of thing. So this keyboard here, I bought a kit and it's made of wood. So I had to actually wax the wood myself, which I'd never done before. My parents were very impressed with me. You know, I was never much of a wood waxing person, so this was a great opportunity for me. And also, you know, soldering each of the electrodes onto the keyboard and getting the little clicky keys and annoying people around me with them. I've just been keeping myself busy with these little hardware projects. This is why I work from home as well, so I can have my clicky keyboards.
That's the best reason to work from home, surely.
Absolutely.
If you're not annoying people 2 rooms away, then your keyboard isn't loud enough, in my opinion.
Not a very good state for my 2-bedroom apartment.
Sounds like somebody else's problem, though, not yours. So what games have you got on your Picade?
Well, so I've been finding a couple of homebrew games. It turns out that folks to this day are still developing games for retro consoles like the old Nintendo Entertainment System and the Super Nintendo, and they're still putting them online. They're of course legal, or they can be purchased. I think some of them are purchasable. Some are open source as well, I believe. And so I've been putting them on and trying them out. I've also been exploring old games that I never played before. Right now I'm on a Kirby kick. So I've been playing lots of Kirby games and having a good time. And looking into new things and just having a lot of fun.
Sounds perfect. Long live Kirby.
For sure.
Yeah, it's been a really good time.
So I guess lockdown hasn't changed much of your way of working.
Well, so since this lockdown has started, a lot of people, that are, I don't know how it is for the others who were working from home beforehand, but I actually felt a pretty big difference. I would say a mood difference, especially at first. It was kind of a shock to there is a mood difference in the air. Having to do things like, I don't want to drag the tone down too much, but doing things like having to put myself on a news diet and that sort of thing, just to kind of avoid the negativity surrounding me. Of course, keeping yourself informed where necessary, but on the bright side, you've got I've been very lucky that my partner's at home, and now we work together. Now we have coffee breaks together. So that's kind of nice and positive, and it's been a really nice support system for the two of us. And I'm so grateful that I have that in my life, that I can make it work. And I said, for some reason, just everybody needed work being done now, so I've like currently got to
That's amazing.
suddenly. Yeah, I've been very lucky. I've been very lucky that I've been able to pick up a couple of things to do. So I'm doing lots of React Native nowadays, and learning a lot about that. It means that I've got these mobile devices. I don't know how familiar you are with React Native, but if you want to refresh the code on your device, you have to shake it, right? So I used to be really self-conscious doing that in public. If you're in a coffee house or in a co-working space and you're like, you feel kind of silly. But now at home, I'm like listening to music and I'm kind of like, so it's been pretty nice.
Do that with your DDR game and have fun.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much, Ramon. Up next is Mina. And as I mentioned in the chat, it starts out silent, so the audio is not broken, and it builds up into a beautiful piece of music. So please enjoy. And thanks again, Ramon.
Thanks a lot.